Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. Sometimes you just really want to cut through all the noise and get straight to the core of what's happening in the world and understand it quickly, but also really deeply. And that's what we're going to do today with President Trump's upcoming tariff announcement
Yes, that's right.
that's happening this Wednesday.
Yeah, you've got a fascinating set of sources here. Uh, White House statements, reports from the Wall Street Journal, CBS News, YouGov, and even a look at some past trade moves from the Trump administration.
Yeah.
It's a really great set of stuff to kind of dig into and understand, what's being proposed and the reactions to it.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that makes this so compelling is that the administration is really putting forward a pretty bold
Vision.
Exactly. Senior advisor Peter Navarro through White House Communications has stated that tariffs on cars alone could bring in something like $100 billion. And that's just kind of the opening salvo, I guess. He's also suggesting that broader tariffs could bring in a whopping $600 billion every year.
Wow.
Which over 10 years adds up to $6 trillion.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Not only are those numbers just huge, but it's also what they're proposing to do with that money.
Yeah.
That's really striking.
Yeah.
Navarro has mentioned using these funds for tax credits or benefits for people who buy American-made vehicles.
Oh, interesting.
This would all be part of a new tax bill.
Okay.
That they're saying, needs to pass.
So it's not just it's going into government coffers or something like that.
It's very specific. It's being tied to very specific policy goals.
Wow.
And outcomes,
And this wouldn't just benefit people buying cars. Navarro also talked about wider tax cuts for the middle class, and he used this really interesting term, blue-collar deplorables.
Right.
So it seems like these tariffs are being positioned as this key that unlocks a lot of other positive economic developments.
Absolutely. It's very much about sort of this broader economic revitalization. That's the sort of the core narrative here. And you see that also in the way this Wednesday's announcement is being presented. It's calling it Liberation Day.
Yeah.
It's going to be in the Rose Garden with the cabinet there.
Yeah.
It's a very big deal to them.
Well, and this is where it gets really interesting to me because despite all of this, build-up and these big pronouncements, the specifics of what will actually be announced are still pretty unclear, right? Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said, we're going to have to wait for the president to unveil all the details on Wednesday. So we don't actually know, which tariffs will be implemented and really importantly, when they would actually go into effect.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point because that creates both a lot of anticipation but also uncertainty.
Yeah.
For businesses, for consumers, what can they expect?
Yeah.
So we have to sort of wait and see.
Yeah.
But we do have some clues. The Wall Street Journal has reported the possibility of a across-the-board 20% tariff.
Wow.
Affecting pretty much every country that trades with the U.S.
Wow.
That's pretty significant.
That's a lot.
Yeah, imagine 20% just added to the cost of, a huge range of imported goods.
Wow. And it seems like President Trump himself alluded to this kind of thinking while speaking on Air Force One. He mentioned starting with all countries, but then suggested that some countries might get better terms than what the U.S. has been offered in the past.
Oh, interesting.
So it seems like maybe a universal starting point, but with the possibility of some adjustments or exemptions.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the art of the deal approach, right?
Yeah.
You start with a big ask and then
negotiate from there.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, all this really raises the question of how is this going to impact American families?
Yeah.
Right. Because the scope of these potential tariffs, particularly this 20% number that's been floated, it really raises concern that, these tariffs are going to translate to higher prices for lots of goods, and that's going to squeeze household budgets.
Exactly. And that's not just an abstract concern. This is something that a lot of people are actually worried about.
Right.
The CBS News YouGov poll showed that a majority of Americans are worried that President Trump is focusing too much on tariffs.
Interesting.
And that they think that these tariffs will raise prices instead of actually addressing, the cost of living, which is what people are actually worried about.
Right. It suggests that maybe there's a gap between the administration's sort of optimistic message and how the public is actually feeling about this.
Absolutely. And then you see it, too, in the financial markets, right? The American stock market declined on Monday with both the Dow and the S&P index showing losses. And this was in the context of, anxieties over these potential tariffs.
Yeah. I mean, you can think of the stock market as a kind of forward-looking indicator in a sense.
Yeah.
And this reaction suggests that at least some investors are worried about what the economic impact of these tariffs will be.
Right. It's not just that they're happening, it's that they might have negative consequences.
Right, exactly.
But the administration is at least publicly downplaying these market reactions.
Okay.
Caroline Leavitt dismissed the stock market dip as just a snapshot of a moment in time and emphasized that the president's focus is on Main Street.
Right. So it's really two different perspectives.
Right.
You've got the sort of Wall Street versus Main Street perspective.
Yeah.
And the administration is saying, Wall Street will adapt. Eventually, they adapted to trade actions under the previous administration as well.
Exactly. And I think that's a really interesting point, because it's like they're saying we're focused on the long game here.
Exactly.
We're focused on these potential benefits that this will have down the line for American industries and for, the average American.
Yeah, and maybe they're viewing these short-term market fluctuations as less significant. But, those market reactions, they can sometimes be the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
Right? They can sometimes tell us that there are bigger trends at play.
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at specific sectors like the auto industry, President Trump has been very vocal about his thinking.
Okay.
In an interview with NBC News, he said he's not worried about tariffs causing vehicle prices to go up. He actually sees that as a benefit.
Real.
He thinks it will make American-made cars more competitive. And he actually said, I hope they raise their prices because if they do, people are going to buy American-made cars. I couldn't care less because if the prices on foreign cars go up, they're going to buy American cars.
So that's a very direct statement of intent, right? The idea is that tariffs are going to actually shift consumer behavior,
Right.
drive people towards American products.
Yeah.
But there's this concept in economics called price elasticity of demand.
Oh, okay.
And for some goods, even a big price hike, like a 20% increase, might not cause demand to drop that much, especially if...
Okay, so like if someone really wants, a very specific type of foreign car with features they can't get elsewhere.
Right, exactly. Or, a particular electronic gadget or, whatever it might be. If there isn't an American-made equivalent that they find equally desirable, then a 20% price increase might make them hesitate, but they might still buy it.
Yeah.
So this whole strategy really hinges on how sensitive consumers are to those price changes and also, how available and how appealing those American-made options are.
Right. And it's also important to remember that these potential new tariffs are not happening in isolation, right?
Of course. Yeah.
The Trump administration already has 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports and 2 rounds of 10% tariffs on goods from China.
Right. So there's already kind of a baseline of, trade actions that are in place.
Exactly.
And this would be building on that.
Exactly. And then last week we had the announcement of global auto tariffs that are supposed to kick in this Thursday.
Right. So it's all sort of adding up, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Wednesday's announcement could be like yet another layer on top of this already really complex structure of import taxes.
Yeah, it's like a layer cake of tariffs.
Yeah. And all of that, perhaps unsurprisingly leads to the possibility of other countries retaliating.
Right, of course.
Several countries have already said that if the U.S. puts in place these new tariffs, they'll respond with their own duties on American-made goods.
Yeah, and that's the danger of a trade war scenario.
Right.
One country puts in place tariffs, and then other countries retaliate. And then it just escalates from there.
Yeah, it becomes this tit for tat where everybody is trying to,
Right, exactly. And those retaliatory tariffs, they're often very targeted.
Oh, interesting.
They try to hit key export industries in the country that initiated the tariffs. So, for example, if the U.S. puts in place these broad tariffs, other countries might retaliate by putting tariffs on American agricultural products.
Oh, wow.
Like soybeans or corn, which would directly hurt American farmers.
Yeah.
And there are many other examples. And it can create this really damaging cycle for international trade.
It seems like what it all boils down to is that President Trump really believes in tariffs.
Yeah.
As an economic tool, he's been talking about them for a long time as a way to revive American manufacturing, reduce the trade deficit, and get people to buy more products that are made in the USA.
Yeah, he's a true believer in tariffs.
Yeah, he even called tariffs the most beautiful word in the dictionary.
That really sums it up.
Yeah.
I mean, his thinking is all about protecting American industries from foreign competition.
Yeah.
And encouraging companies to produce things here in the U.S.
Yeah.
He sees tariffs as a way to kind of reset trade relationships that he views as unfair to the U.S.
So let's just recap here. The administration is saying that these tariffs could bring in a lot of money
Yes.
And they're talking about using that money for tax benefits and cuts.
Right.
Specifically for people buying American cars.
And the middle class more broadly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, there are a lot of people worried that these tariffs will actually lead to higher prices for American families, and that could erase any tax advantages.
It's a real concern.
Yeah, the financial markets aren't too happy about this idea,
Yeah.
and other countries might retaliate.
Yeah.
All of this is happening on top of tariffs that are already in place, and we still don't know all the details of what's going to be announced on Wednesday.
It's a very complex and evolving situation.
It is. So here's something I want you to think about. Given these kind of competing viewpoints on the pluses and minuses of these tariffs, what do you think will ultimately determine whether they're successful or not for the U.S. economy as a whole? It's a really big question with a lot of potential consequences for all of us.
It is.
So thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.
See you later.